welcome to this special episode of the Puck Drop podcast. Today, we want to talk about free agency as it opens up fully now for all PWHL players to have the ability to sign with any team, not only their own team. We did have some re-signings prior to today, and even today, some players chose to stay with their current team. So we have a chance to talk with our friend and colleague, Alex Adams, a reporter from the Hockey News, and we were watching our phones as we, talked about which players might go where. So it's a great chat, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope by the time you see this, it's not irrelevant. So please enjoy that interview right now. All right, so we're happy now to welcome Alex Adams, journalist and writer for the Hockey News, and also host of the Behind the Play podcast. Welcome on in, Alex.
Thanks so much for having me. See, we've known each other a little bit through Twitter, and then we were both at the draft, and that was, you were like my best friend there. So we had a time
Yeah.
seeing all the players in the hotel. You were telling me, as much as I'd like to think I know a lot about the PWHL, I think you know way more and recognize all the players. So it was cool, noticing all the players at our hotel, and I introduced you to some people as well. So it was a
Yeah.
really fun time, and it was great to kind of be behind the scenes with you.
Yeah.
That draft was pretty crazy for both of us. So it was
Yeah.
pretty cool to be there with you.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think one thing I do have on my side is that little bit of facial recognition, kind of go back through my catalog, and sometimes the name does not come to me, but and I think I shared, and thank you for saying that. I'll go back to who you introduced me to in 1 second, but I think I told the story of seeing Sophie Jakes in the lobby with player that I, just in the moment you're like, I know who this is, but as it's hard to do two things at once. And
Yeah.
she had an Ohio State jacket on, and I like her name was just like not coming to me. So I just said, and I'm sure you're looking forward to being drafted, hoping she would sort of fill in the blank. And she did. It was Jennifer Gardner.
Mm.
And they were going to a meetup of Ohio State, friends. And so that was my moment of just like, oh, well, I had to do it.
Well,
Um,
you met Poulin in the elevator.
I
You met
did.
Nora Toulouse and Rania, and yeah, there's a
Danielle
bunch of.
Peshova. Yeah, those
Yeah.
three, it was almost getting to the point of like, I'm embarrassed now because I kept running into them, and like I wasn't stalking anybody, but when you're in the same hotel, yeah, there was a bit of an elevator issue as we mentioned. So it seemed like, people were gathering there a little bit, which led to some run-ins. And then you introduced me to Drake Batherson,
Yeah,
known better as the brother of May
exactly.
Batherson and their parents. So that was great. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
No, it was fun. I know Drake. I covered the Sens as well, so we had a prior relationship. So I gravitated to Drake just because we knew each other, and then you gravitated to May Batherson, of course, and um Drake and May's parents as well. And it was cool. We saw them, I think, like 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
in that hotel too. So we became part of the Batherson clan for draft day. So it was pretty cool to kind of introduce you, and you introduced me to a couple people as well.
Yeah.
So it was fun.
Yeah. And I think the family angle is so nice. I mean, of course, they're real people and they're going through this with their daughters on that day, and a big life experience and a big change. And I thought it was interesting that May's and Drake's mom was, kind of concerned that they wanted to keep her busy and keep her mind on other things and go to the Mall of America. And, that's the kind of thing that if you're there, you get to see some of that behind the scenes. Was there anything else like that when you bumped into folks or you saw parents or anything like that?
I mean, I think you just have the wizardry of saying hi to everyone and making people feel warm, which I don't have to that extent, and maybe not the chutzpah. But what I did find really cool was on the, obviously seeing all the players, which was cool. And I remember going into an elevator, and it's just Sarah Philly and I and stuff like that. And she's like, "Who the heck are you?" But she was nice. I don't mean that in a negative way,
Yeah.
but What I do remember was just on the draft floor, and basically there's the stage, the players get drafted, they do a little pregame interview, and then they exit kind of behind the scenes, and then there was some other stuff where like a press conference type room ish. It wasn't really one, but what was really cool for me because I'd be chasing down the Ottawa players because I cover PWHL Ottawa. I remember when Manon McMahon got drafted, she like jumped into Ashton Bell's arms and they started
Oh,
hugging and like screaming, and so those are the kind of moments that was really cool. And then when Steph Markowski got drafted, you could hear Daniel Serdachny's parents yell and come over to her and tell like the GM like you got Mike Hirschfeld like you got a great one with
mhm.
Stephanie, and they were kicking, kicking and screaming with joy. And so those kind of moments with just seeing the players get drafted and knowing that some of their friends are there and celebrating like literally
Yeah,
minutes, 30 seconds, like
yeah,
right after they're being drafted. That's a pretty cool moment.
yeah,
And I think that's what I'll remember, and just even just meeting them and kind of saying hi and saying welcome to Ottawa and all the stuff. I felt a bit like a GM because it's like, well,
yeah.
I'm covering you, but and another experience, I guess, which was funny was with Madeline Wethington. I went to say hi, and then Mike Hirschfeld, the GM of Ottawa, just said, he's the enemy. Don't talk to him. Like tongue in cheek, he was
Oh,
joking, and it was one of those moments. So there's those types of stories
that's
are kind of
nice.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And you were kind of the welcoming committee. There weren't too many folks. I mean, there were a lot of press there, but going back and forth between those two rooms, like we talked about as a one person, reporter was kind of like, where should we be at this moment, like with the stage or backstage with the press conference? And you know, asking questions with the microphone. There just weren't that many people. So it was almost like, hi, I'm the only reporter here from PWHL team name. And so it was kind of nice, and we'll definitely be seeing those players again. So that's a good way to meet them on that happy day. And that
Yeah.
was interesting too. You can fill us in on the Markowski Serdachny connection that
Yeah.
GM wasn't even really aware of.
Yeah, so basically the long and the short of it is that they grew up as like best friends back in Alberta. Grew up playing together for, as kids, and then they actually were on the same Canada Winter Games team. I think they
Right.
would have been about like 16, 17 in 2019. And their coach was Carla McLeod. And so she had coached both of them. And when I talked to Carla at the draft, and after both were selected and they're best friends and
Yeah.
everything. And I said, well, did you know, like, did Mike know that they were best friends, the GM? And she's like, nope. I just told him after, and he kind of chuckled. He's like, "Oh wow, we're kind of reuniting best friends." And so it wasn't a factor the reason
Yeah.
why they picked Markowski, but it was kind of a happy surprise for Mike Hirschfeld, and then obviously for Carla, who knew the connection, knew the players
Yeah.
pretty well, and she thinks both of them have that Alberta grit, as she likes to say, and is pretty excited to have players that she's coached before come to the team.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so Ottawa, just good, happy accidents. Ottawa, the land of the happy.
There you go.
But let's go back. Well, let's mention first that we're recording this on free agency day, or the opening of the, you know, ability for free agents to sign anywhere. And I know you're watching your phone.
Yep.
Thank you for that. And
I'm doing that to update the listeners if Daryl Watts signs somewhere or someone else goes somewhere. So
right. We should have like a double desk set up here because
yeah.
we have so many people running around getting all the rumors. Not really. So I kind of keep a running table here. Not, there hasn't been a whole lot of action, but the past couple days there were re-signings. So far, nobody has switched teams because today would be the only day they're actually able to do that. Yesterday we had those four players from Boston that re-signed, and as well we had Allie Monroe in Toronto And today we have Hannah Miller re-signing in Toronto, which I'm very, very happy to see. She's a big part of their forward ranks. And then all eyes are on Ottawa, really. We have, I don't know if we have official confirmation of the
I can put my stamp of
yeah,
approval on the fact
well,
that Katarina Marzoa has signed with Ottawa. I think there's just on free agency day and everything is funneled to the league. Announcements are kind of weird that way, but I would it's done 100% and Marzoa is signed with Ottawa for 2 years. Yeah.
nice. Okay, we'll definitely take your stamp as official. And that's huge. I mean, like I know Daryl Watts is now the one that we're all talking about, but let's just circle back to Mrazova for a minute. I was a little surprised that she didn't sign earlier. I had, you know, almost no doubt that that's where she wanted to play. Do you know, did she want to just make
I
some calls or?
I think yeah, I think Ottawa's was in a really tricky position because they had the two best players probably heading into the free agency window.
Mhm,
And because of how everything shapes out, it was tough to kind of outbid and keep money for the future because there is not a lot of money in the system.
mhm,
So I from what I'm hearing with the Mrazova deal, they took it as close as they could to free agency for essentially leverage. And I would not be surprised if she's getting paid more next in the second year than she is this year.
mhm,
And that she used her leverage for good to get as much as she could, and so she's staying in Ottawa, and I think that's kind of puts Ottawa in a bind for Daryl Watts. But I think, as you mentioned, a really good player. She was second on the team in scoring, had a couple injuries, but probably was gonna be top five in scoring before she got banged up and missed a couple
yeah.
games. And so she's a really dynamic player, amazing in the shootouts, but just
Mhm,
she did have a high shooting percentage.
mhm,
So I don't know if she'll score as much, but she's a playmaker. She's 31, but I think a 2 year deal isn't the end of the world. And that's,
mhm,
the first big free agent re-signing, I would say. Obviously Hannah Miller as well,
mhm.
who played really well in Toronto, but probably, the biggest one so far.
Yeah,
And there's still Daryl Watts looming large.
yeah. Yes, I at one point Mrazova was fourth. I think that's the highest she got, but she had that really, hot streak for a period there when she got injured, unfortunately. And yeah, I think she could rightly be called the number one, free agent on the board and now off the board. And yeah, Daryl Watts is such an interesting case. And you with boots on the ground in Ottawa maybe can explain what you
Yeah.
do know. Most viewers probably at least heard about if they didn't see the actual interview at the end of the season where, in whatever words she chose, she said, I'm a free agent and I'm going to explore free agency. And, that set off some ripples of, that means she's not coming back. And so what was the feeling there with Watts?
I There's a couple things, but the first thing I would say is from even when I spoke to her, I've talked to Watts numerous times covering the team. Even midway through the season, she's talked about value. She sees this league as professional. She kind of talks more like an NHLer and getting what's, like a fair payday. And I think from her perspective, it comes down to cash money rules, right? And in the case with Ottawa, she was going to probably go to the highest bidder because of Mrazova's deal. And hopefully, I think Ottawa's trying to sign Serdachny to a large 3 year extension that we just saw with Caleb Barnes in Montreal. There's just not going to be a lot of money out there for Ottawa to re-sign her, and I think other teams like Boston, even Toronto, Montreal, have some money to spend, and I think she'll probably go to the highest bidder. I think if Ottawa had the room and just outbid, I think she would stay. But at this point, I would be very surprised if she returns to Ottawa, and that's Mike Hirschfeld, who I've interviewed numerous times, know pretty well. Um, that's a big blow because in my opinion, she was their most dynamic player last year, and to lose that, and now go to another team, you get significantly worse and another team gets significantly better. And
Yeah.
it's going to be really tough for Ottawa, I think, there's no one in this class, I think, maybe Cava in Minnesota, but I don't think there's anyone who has the skill sets of Daryl Watts. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to be a big blow if it looks like she's leaving, but you never know. Mike Hirschfeld still can move things around, can cut players. But at this present moment, I'd be very surprised if she returns to Ottawa.
Yeah, that's yeah, from an Ottawa fan perspective, it's just tough to kind of wait and bite your nails. And she's just such an interesting player and person. As you said, I just flat out don't think anybody has the skill set, the package that she has. And, that line that she was on with Mrazova and Jenner was just so electric, especially towards the end. The chemistry was really noticeable. And but she's also, I said this to you. I think she has a bit of a reputation. I mean, that is a loaded word. We'll just say, I think some look at her as like such an independent thinker and just wanting to do things her own way. She was okay saying, I don't care about not playing for Team Canada, and she accepted what at the time was the largest contract in PHF history, which didn't actually go through because of the league folded, but that got people's attention, kind of like, wow, who almost like who does she think she is? Or that's not the right way to say it, but sort of like, okay, I see you. And for you to add as well that money is kind of driving her. It's interesting because there just isn't that much money when you look at the top, the we talked about the scale. It's definitely not only a sliding scale, it's like huge at the top. Like every team is a Toronto Maple Leafs style where the top six are making good money and then the rest are really fighting over thousands, So,
Like,
that's odd. What are your feelings like?
this is why I kept my phone open, and our
Okay,
Austin Kennedy, Daryl Watts hasn't signed, just to be clear, but he's saying essentially that all indications are that she'll end up outside of Ottawa. Teams are offering backloaded contracts for next year
right,
and the year after, which is probably going to be the factor. And because Ottawa, I think, did that with Mrazova, they just won't have the money, especially if they want to sign Serdakny, right? And that's the
right.
problem is with the way it works is essentially everyone's a free agent, right? After 1 year, even
Yeah,
Serdakny, Fillier, they can all jump ship
yeah.
after next season if they don't sign, big money
Longer deals.
tickets.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
And I think the league, sorry, put into place that extension clause or just added that it's guaranteed money if a player is re-signing with the same team, which meant is something that would play a small part in a player's thinking, like, this is guaranteed, so it's a safer bet. But someone like Watts obviously wants to bet on herself and go where the money is or where the better opportunity to then capitalize, hopefully, when some bigger dollars appear. The other consideration, though, is next year's draft class is that double cohort that we've talked about, where because of all the COVID timings and such, players opted to take that extra year. And so there are going to be some big names in that draft. And I'm sure GMs are not oblivious to that as well, that they want to have room to,
yeah,
make room for those players. So they're kind of weighing like, does Michaela Cava, benefit us if we sign her and she's asking for 2 or 3 years versus whoever we might get to draft?
it's such a hard process for all GMs, and in many ways, you have to have a timesheet or an Excel sheet to plan for this year, next year,
Yeah.
and 2 years down the line. And because of essentially everyone becoming free agencies very quickly, um, there's so many different machinations and situations that can occur. And because of that, it makes it really hard to know what to do and what the right decisions are. And if you allocate money now, uh, what what changes for, in the future, right? And if you say next year you draft number one overall, you want to sign them to a long year deal. You sign Watts for, let's say Ottawa signs her to a 3-year big money deal. Maybe you can't keep your first overall pick, who's, Caroline Harvey or someone like that, right? So
Yeah.
it's a really tough thing. And what the problem is, and hopefully we'll see how it goes. But the CBA got the women's league the league, and this is awesome. It's also 7 years and basically not going up.
Yeah.
And after this year, I think we'll start seeing more free agency, but it'll also be confusing with the draft as well,
Yeah.
because each team will the big money contracts they signed to start the PWHL will be starting to come off the books next year,
Right.
and especially in 2 years from now. So there'll be a bit more money in the system, but because the league salary cap only goes up 3% every year for the next 6 years, 7 years, beginning this year, it's going to make it much harder for kind of the middle class to get paid. And when they do, it can really affect how you keep higher class players as well.
Yeah. It is very interesting. We're not talking the dollars of the NHL, but certainly some of the decision making and planning and the win now versus, keep some room for later. Those things are definitely in play. And, like you said, Caroline Harvey, nobody wants to finish last, but there's another big prize coming up. And so, yeah, teams kind of have to, judge as carefully as they can where they're going to fit in the power structure, like a New York. Did we get so much better that, we're going to put our chips on the table now, or are we kind of just going to have a year where we just, you know, do what we can with some dollars left over for what's coming in the draft? And then let's just talk for a second about Minnesota, if we can. I know there's a lot to say, but I think people know what my opinion is on just, their drafting of Britta Curl and the culture change that might be happening there.
Yeah, to say um it's a sticky situation is would be putting it mildly. With Britta Curl, with just how Darwitz left, and now Ken Klee is the GM, and how Coyne Schofield is reportedly, at the crux of that change in Minnesota. It is interesting that they haven't really made a move uh, because of that turmoil, and we'll see what they do. They will have a bit of money because they haven't signed anyone yet. And they do have some big money contracts like every team, but they do have enough flexibility to do things. I
Mm.
feel like that's why I think Cava will stay, is just because they have enough flexibility for the most part. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But I still think they'll be a pretty good team, but I don't know if they'll be good enough to, outside of maybe if Ottawa takes a step back as well. But I don't love their team going forward, and that's the reigning PWHL
Yeah,
champions.
it's
Although
interesting.
they
Yeah.
snuck in, and yeah, I don't know if the PWHL final was the best two teams in the league this year, but
Right. Yeah.
uh, it if I had to guess, they're going to take a step back, and I don't know what that culture is like for so many of the players.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could it work? Maybe. Sometimes you don't know. They lost Kunin as well.
Yeah. She's retired. I'm
So
just deleting her as we speak.
uh,
Whoops.
that's
Sorry.
fine. That's
Bye
fine.
bye.
No, you reminded me of her, and she was a good
Yeah.
player too. So
And I'm kind of updating my list, or we're looking at it here. And Liz Sheppers is another name that I think is a very significant player that they would want to get signed. Sydney Brott as well. She was injured for a spell this year, but you know, it's isn't it strange? We're here talking about the Walter Cup champions and kind of shaking our head at their prospects for repeating. And like you said, the final, I mean, playoffs, that's why they play the games, and that's why, they won fair and square. However, we saw them go into the playoffs limping a little bit and then kind of find their groove. And so any team could do that on any given year, obviously. And just the vibe and the way it looks, I think you're right. It just feels like they almost would be taking a step back if they don't have all that good energy, because other teams are, you know, loading up, and they've got some really great players in the draft. So you said you wouldn't be surprised if Cavalry signs.
That's right. Is that the house always wins?
Yeah.
Always, but it tends to. And I think right now where the PWHL is, um, it's hard for like bigger name players to leave their teams because of the way there's just not a lot of money in the system.
Yep.
At least for this year, I think next off season we'll probably see more movement, and the year after that we'll see even more movement
Yeah.
with deals coming off. So I think she stays, but I don't have any inside information with Minnesota.
Yeah, we'll see. It's just something to keep us, interested here the next few days. And just before we, wrap up, I wanted to touch on PWHL Montreal because they had such a list of free agents, a long list, and players that look like they are probably not going to come back. And they had a really interesting draft. They have kind of the bonus player, Lena Lundblom, who was drafted last year that they were able to sign. And they've got Amanda Kessel kind of at least in the fold, whether they end up, signing her. So they got their two sort of, must sign or at least logical signings, Keppel and Boulier. And I don't know, Claire Dalton is a name that we're kind of wondering why she hasn't signed, and maybe Gabrielle David. But they have a lot of, maybe they're going to have a lot of turnover there. What are your thoughts on that interesting team?
I think that it's interesting how quiet Montreal's been, and as we were recording this, they obviously signed Caleb Barnes to a 3-year contract. I'd imagine that is pretty good money for a first round pick.
Right.
So that will probably take up a lot of their cap. It's a player they needed. They needed defenders, especially on the right side. Obviously bringing back Boulier is big. I love Amanda Boulier. She's my favorite player in the PWHL. I know her. I
Oh,
went well, but we follow each other on Instagram. We
yeah.
chat. She's I love Boo. So
Good things about her. I should just quickly say they did sign Elaine Chuley as well. So
yes,
that's a
which is a big,
big
as
one.
a backup, right? As
Yeah.
well. And she was so good last year as a backup as well. So
Yeah.
I mean, they're pretty top heavy, but their top is pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think with this draft, as you said, I think they drafted relatively well. They had some interesting choice things with Amanda Kessel and Abby Boring
Abby
as well.
Boreen. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll see how those go, but even at just the top of the draft, I think they did relatively well. And but they have a bit of money to play with, and maybe they keep the same core. Maybe they try to maybe spice it up a little bit more than most teams.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, again, I don't have inside information, but I think they'll still be really good next year,
Mm-hmm.
and just adding around the edges.
So in my rumor mongering segment for today, I am gonna just, mention, I don't know if they're gonna keep Michaela Grant Mentis. She seemed to mesh pretty well there. And of course, she's good friends with Daryl Watts. But wouldn't that make a big splash? We know Danielle Sauvageau is very tricky and thinking. She definitely did that during the draft. So by the time this goes out, Daryl Watts will have signed with Team X, and this will all be moot. But it's just fun to speculate. I hope it goes on a little bit longer for an interesting sake to
Yeah,
keep.
well, it's interesting. We're talking about free agency, and again, I'll go back to Ian Kennedy, who just tweeted something that's not anything direct, but he basically says that the whole ecosystem is on pause until Daryl Watts decides where
Yeah,
she's going. Still doesn't think she's going back to Ottawa unless something dramatic changes. But I think we'll see once Watts goes, there'll be a domino effect where everyone else will
yeah,
plop off. And I don't mean I'm not saying it's going to be everyone, but there
yeah,
will be a domino effect where other teams
yeah,
are like, okay, I missed on that. Now I'm going to
yeah,
sign X, Y, Z,
yeah,
and you'll probably start seeing more players switch teams as well.
yeah.
Um, Watts goes, especially if she doesn't stay in Ottawa, then Ottawa will probably have some money to spend.
Yeah, yeah. And there are those players who are, free agents just by virtue of not being drafted. They're not on these lists, but there are still some good names there. So, there's just so much to keep track of. And hopefully, the summer will still have some news for us. But we know you're busy, covering the Ottawa situation and interviewing the draftees and players and have your hotline to Mike Hirschfeld. So we'll let
A
you
little bit. Not
a
not
little.
I'm not that I'm not Ian Kennedy locked in, but I have a couple sources, but not
Yeah.
I'm not that crazy. But I
Yeah.
appreciate the kind compliments.
Well,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, we're on the same team here, just trying to get
Mhm.
the news out and, do it fair and square and keep people interested and keep the discussion going. That's what we're doing here. So I will let you go so you can get back to that. Alex, thank you so much for the time today. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll probably circle back and chat after some of these dominoes do fall into place.
Of course, have me on anytime. And I will say that I know this podcast is for the PWHL, but I'm not supposed to be a homer, but I am. So go
It's all right.
Ottawa. I hope, I try to be biased, but I also am a fan too. So
Yeah.
I was just gonna say more than happy to come on again and thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. We appreciate it. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
PWHL Puck Drop Podcast.